This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello, and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the GSMC Sports Podcast. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. Before I start talking anything sports, I want to remind you all to subscribe to the podcast so you always get those alerts and notifications on your phone, on your laptop, on your watch, on whatever device you might be listening to this episode on. Again, I ask you to subscribe to the podcast if you are enjoying the show. And again, if you're a returning listener, again, you want to subscribe to the podcast so you get those alerts and notifications on whatever device you are listening to this on. And you can be one of the first people to know when we drop a new episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast here over at the GSMC Sports Podcast team. And you can be one of the first people to listen to a new episode when we release it. So again, please do not forget to subscribe to the podcast on whatever website or application on your phone, again, laptop or watch, whatever you're listening to this episode on. Again, please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Also, we would love it if you could leave us just a 5-star review or just a positive review in general if you are enjoying the content and discussion points of the show. Again, we would love if you could just leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general on that same app or website you are listening to this episode on. It would give us a big boost of confidence and let us know that you guys are enjoying every aspect of the show that we are producing for you guys. Again, the discussion points, the topics, the flow of it, the sound mixing, all of that stuff. We would love it if you could just give us some feedback, hopefully positive feedback on all that good stuff on that same, app or website you are listening to this episode on. And finally, don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us. We would love to interact with you guys more on there. In general, we can talk about the show, we can talk about sports, we can really talk about pretty much anything you guys want over there on social media. And overall, we would just love to interact with you guys more on there in general. So again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us, and we would love it if you would follow us or give us a follow over on those great social media platforms. I hope wherever you are and however you may be listening, you and your family are happy and healthy during these extremely trying times in the world today. I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. We took a little bit of a break over Thanksgiving break. I had a great Thanksgiving. I loved watching football with my immediate family, socially distanced, of course. Some not great football games on Thanksgiving, but they ended up being entertaining nonetheless. I love watching football on Thanksgiving. Great tradition in my family, and I hope a lot of other families out there as well. Again, we have a fantastic show for you all today. Over the course of this episode, I'm giving you every major discussion point and topic and sort of narrative at this point in the NFL season, recapping some of the games. We'll talk about Carson Wentz and his embarrassing loss to the Seahawks last night. Is it time to move off Carson Wentz? I was a Carson Wentz defender at the beginning of the year. I thought he was the best quarterback in the division. Carson Wentz keeps proving me wrong by the week. Is it time for Philadelphia to move off on him? We'll talk about that later on in the show. Why the Chiefs might be the Golden State Warriors of the league now, and I don't know if anybody can really stop them. We'll get on to that later on. Who is going to make the playoffs in the AFC out of all those teams? The Browns, the Raiders, the Ravens, the Dolphins, the Colts, the Titans, the AFC playoff race. We'll get into all that good stuff as well towards the end of the episode. But I want to start off with, I think, what was the main narrative of this NFL week. What is going on in Tampa Bay? So there's a popular saying in life that life is all about expectations, and I think this really applies to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So depending on maybe if you're a Bucs fan or if you're just a casual NFL fan or if you just, you're deep into all the NFL like me, what were your expectations of this Tampa Bay Buccaneer team once Tom Brady signed? Now, I think everybody immediately went to Super Bowl, but I think, honestly, if everyone had to take a poll, all football fans had to take a poll, I think we would all say that this team was going to be a top 10 team in the league, that they were going to either furnish, first or second in their division, definitely make the playoffs, at least have double-digit wins, and they should be a perennial contender and have a chance to at least go to the NFC Championship. And in my opinion, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have checked all those boxes. I don't see a reason why not to believe that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers aren't going to make the playoffs, that they're not going to win, 10 games, that they couldn't potentially make an AFC or an NFC Championship game. But if the expectation was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to win the Super Bowl, then they're going to fall short of that expectation. I don't think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a Super Bowl team. That doesn't necessarily mean that anything's wrong. This is a crazy year for everything in regards to football and football operations. Less training camp, no preseason, less reps, and all the teams that are sort of surviving and thriving are teams that have, kind of same coach, same quarterback, bringing all these guys back. When you look at the top of the league right now, who's winning? The Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, right? Then you go to the Steelers. Mike Tomlin, Big Ben, who've worked together for a decade. Drew Brees, Sean Payton worked together for a decade. Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson worked together for a decade, right? All of the top teams in the league this year don't have a rookie head coach, don't have a new quarterback, don't have a new regime. There is no Sean McVay the first or second year he got there. There's no Dak Prescott the first or second year he got there. All of the winning teams in the league right now are teams that either have an experienced head coach or, the same quarterback and coaching duo that have been working forever. And yes, there are some teams that are probably going to make the playoffs, like the Browns or the Dolphins, teams that, have a new quarterback or have a new coach this year or a new partnership, and they're going to make the latter end of the playoffs, but they're not going to make any noise. They're not going to win multiple playoff games. The Dolphins or the Browns aren't going to the AFC Championship game or anything like that. So why was the expectation for Tom Brady and Bruce Arians, Tom Brady, who's been working in the same system, the same city, the same town, the same organization for 20 plus years, that he was going to go to Tampa Bay and all of a sudden, oh my God, they're going to win the Super Bowl. Year one expectations of Tampa Bay, I think, was just to become relevant. Make the playoffs. Put some more fans in seats. Get fans excited about the future, because I don't think this is a one-year thing for Tom Brady. He signed a 2-year deal. Wouldn't surprise me if he played longer. But here's the thing. There might be one problem in Tampa Bay, right? I don't necessarily think there is a problem in Tampa Bay, but if you are going to blame someone for why are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers not going to win the Super Bowl this year, you'd have to blame Bruce Arians, I think. And I'm not one of these guys that's always a Tom Brady defender, that's somebody that's like, oh my God, Tom Brady's the GOAT, he can't do anything wrong. Tom Brady has messed up plenty of times. He's never scored a first quarter touchdown in any of the Super Bowls he played in. He's stunk in some of the Super Bowls he's played in, including that Rams one recently. But he's also played absolutely incredible in some other Super Bowls that he lost, including that Philadelphia Eagles one. So I'm not the type of guy that, some people are accusing Tony Romo of being last broadcast, which is just defending Tom in every which way. But there is a point in defending Tom in this argument. My only concern when Tom Brady signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers was not is Tom old, was not is Tom's arm shot, was not that Tom is a step behind or a step slower or anything like that. It was how the hell is this offensive scheme and system really going to work? Bruce Arians has been a guy his entire career, did it with Arizona, did it with Indianapolis when he took over for Chuck Pagano, and did it with Tampa Bay before Tom Brady got there, which is we are going to throw the ball vertically, which might cause some turnovers. The no risk it, no biscuit sort of term you've been hearing sort of this whole week when talking about Tampa Bay. That's what Bruce Arians is. A little bit more loose, flip-flops, on the beach in Tampa Bay. And Tom Brady sort of came from New England at sort of this sort of surgical perspective of we're going to pick your defense apart through film work, through timing, through rhythm, through death by 1,000 paper cuts. So this partnership was weird to begin with, right? They have two completely opposite play styles, but like they say, opposites attract, and I was convinced that this was going to work at some level, and I thought they would sort of mix and match, what they're going to do sort of with this playing offense. That is where the issue is. That is where the disconnect is. There is a disconnect between Tom Brady and Bruce Arians. Now, is it as bad as some people are saying that, oh my God, Bruce Arians needs to be removed and they don't like each other and Bruce Arians keeps throwing Tom under the bus? I don't think it's that bad. And I don't think there was no collaboration between Tom and Bruce Arians. And I think Tom Brady, to some extent, wanted to throw the ball downfield, right? But I think the experiment's over. The throwing the ball downfield, the no risk it, no biscuit, is not going to work if Tom Brady's your quarterback. And this is the issue with a lot of coaches today in the NFL. There are so many coaches in the NFL today that are arrogant and that think that their system can work with anybody and that any quarterback can adapt to their system and everybody must do the system that I believe they should do. Happens all the time. Matt Patricia got fired for that. Bill O'Brien got fired for that. Doug Peterson could be getting fired for that. I'll talk about that later on the show. Freddie Kitchens got fired for that. Right? Adam Gase is going to get fired again for that. Right? Matt Nagy could get fired for that as well. It's important for these coaches to admit that they've made mistakes and adapt. Have you noticed the New England Patriots dynasty? Are all the teams that they've won with look the same? No. One year, 2011, when they went undefeated and lost in the Super Bowl, that was an air raid offense. Tom Brady threw 50 touchdowns. Then you look at their most recent Super Bowl win against the Rams. That was a ground and pound defensive grind team. The reason why teams are so successful for so long is because they adapt. Look at the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. They're already adapting. They're not leading the league in pass attempts like they did last year. They're not leading the league in passing touchdowns or passing yards like they did last year. They've been more of a power run offense than a pass offense. They're trying to be more balanced. They're improving their defense. They don't want to be a one-trick pony. Because in the NFL, which stands for not for long, a one-trick pony doesn't win you success, doesn't start a dynasty, doesn't get you multiple Super Bowls. One-trick pony gets you to the Super Bowl. Then you lose. Sean McVay. San Francisco 49ers, Philadelphia Eagles, right? You can get to a Super Bowl, hell, you can maybe win one, but that's not going to give you long-term success. The NFL is always about adapting. It's a copycat league. Coaches have film. Look at Lamar Jackson. He's struggling to adapt. Mike Tomlin has made it so long for so far because his teams are adapting. The Steelers are usually known for this defensive, gritty sort of team. They've gone through running phases. They've gone through air raid phases. They've gone through pick your defense apart phases, right? They've gone through the good and bad defensive phases, right? So it's always about adapting. Bruce Arians needs to adapt with Tom Brady. It's not working. Tom Brady has the lowest deep ball percentage in the league. Tom Brady is struggling to throw the deep ball more than anybody else. He leads the league in quote-unquote bad throws, according to Pro Football Focus, which is it's an iffy stat, but nonetheless the point still proves. Most bad throws from quarterbacks this season, according to Pro Football Focus. Tied for third is Drew Lock with 66. Tied for third is Matt Stafford with 66. Second is Carson Wentz, who everybody harps on and thinks should get benched. He has 74. Tom Brady has 83. Tom Brady has almost 20 more throws has almost 10 more throws than the guy below him in Carson Wentz. So it's not all on Bruce Arians, but again, these bad throws, these interceptions, Tom Brady could potentially have a career high in interceptions this year, is because of Bruce Arians. It's because of the system. But Tom Brady on play action, this most recent game against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, 4-5, 83 yards and a touchdown. That's where Tom Brady operates. The play-action game. He wants to get his running backs involved. He wants to hit the slot guy, Antonio Brown. There's a reason why the last few weeks, Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski has been his favorite target. Right now, the most targeted receiver right now on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers has been, I believe, Rob Gronkowski the last 2 weeks. And then after that, it's been Antonio Brown. And then Mike Evans. And that's for a reason. Not that Tom Brady doesn't like Mike Evans or doesn't like throwing the ball downfield. I'm sure he wants to incorporate in the passing game. But Tom Brady's strengths have never been throwing the ball deep. Tom Brady's strengths has always been his mind, his football IQ, and his accuracy in between the numbers. If the Tampa Bay Buccaneers want to win a Super Bowl, they need to adapt to Tom Brady. Tom Brady doesn't need to adapt to Bruce Arians. We know what Tom Brady has done at the highest level. We don't know what Bruce Arians has done in the Super Bowl. We don't know what Bruce Arians has been a multiple-time Super Bowl champion. Last time I checked, Bruce Arians didn't coach a dynasty. So why is Tom Brady adapting to this Bruce Arians system instead of Bruce Arians adapting to Tom Brady? And that's the difference between good and great coaches in this league. That's the difference between Sean McVay and Bill Belichick. That's the difference between some of these other guys and, Mike Tomlin, is that they're willing to adapt to the roster they have. You need, as an NFL coach, to identify your strengths on your football team and use those to your advantage. Don't try to make your strengths something that they're not. Identify your strengths and go what they do. Do what they do. Give the ball to the guys and put them in the best position to succeed. But back to my original sort of statement and point. Is there a problem in Tampa Bay? Not necessarily. This team is still probably going to go 10-6 or 11-5. Now, they're going to not make the Super Bowl because for a couple of reasons. One, Tom Brady has never won back-to-back road playoff games his entire career. I don't expect that to change now. And unfortunately, the Saints decided to be really, really good this year and kind of, they're going to win the division and there's not much Tampa Bay can do. They've had their number all year. But would I be completely surprised if Tampa Bay went in there, won 2 or 3 playoff games and went, to the NFC Championship? No, it wouldn't at all. But I do think at the end of this year, when the result eventually happens after, if I had to predict, I think they'll win their first playoff game at home, then they'll get on the road and probably not do as well. Here's the thing. It's not necessarily a problem, but I think at the end of this year, no matter what the result is, they're not going to win the Super Bowl again. Tom Brady's never won back-to-back road playoff games his entire career, and that was in New England. I don't understand why he would do it in Tampa Bay. Do they have the offense and the firepower to do it? Absolutely. Do they have the defense to do it? Sure. Do they have the coach to do it? I think. But I think at the end of the day, Bruce Arians, Tom Brady, and Byron Leftwich need to sit down and sort of redesign this offense. And I'm not sort of blaming them for not having the perfect sort of formulating, flowing offense that they have this year. Their offense isn't necessarily bad. They're averaging about 8 points a game. But it's not going to get you to the Super Bowl. And I'm not necessarily blaming them because, again, maybe they didn't have the opportunity because of COVID to do that this offseason. And that, this offseason, Brady was going to sort of lean more on Arians and his play calling and his style of system. And then in year 2 was when they were really going to adjust and sort of develop a new game plan. Maybe that was the case with him, Leftwich, and Arians. So I think that's what they need to do at the end of this year. Now, will they do it? I think so. Again, this team is good. And it's all about expectations. What was your expectation for a 43-year-old quarterback being in the same system for 20 years, changing complete cities, completely different environments, completely different coaching staffs, completely different play styles in a way harder division? Don't forget, they're playing in a division with Sean Payton, Drew Brees, sort of the not as good as New England, but sort of a poor man's version of New England of, quarterback and coach have been there forever. They've won a Super Bowl together. They've won multiple games together, right? So they were always going to be, at least 12-4. So what was your expectation? Because I had them going 11-5 at the beginning of the year, and that's where they're going to end up. And sure, you can harp on Brady for the interceptions, but at the end of the day, Jameis Winston had a career high in interceptions under Bruce Arians. Andrew Luck had a career high in interceptions under Bruce Arians. I'm pretty sure even Carson Palmer had a career high in interceptions against Bruce Arians as well. And if Tom Brady hits that or gets close to that mark, that's not that surprising to me. But I don't think Tom Brady has lost a step. I don't think his arm has lost zip. And I think when Tampa Bay is at their best, not many teams can beat them. But the only unfortunate circumstances is it's just like a lot of Bruce Arians teams. They're not at their best a lot, right? They're a very inconsistent team. They're in and out. Some days they're at their best and you can't stop them. And other days they lose to the Chicago Bears on Thursday Night Football, right? But what was your expectation? Specifically with that last game too. They lost 27-24 to the Kansas City Chiefs. Who's going to beat the Chiefs, right? Who? If you gave, NFL fan bases, right? Probably 30 out of the 32 teams would take a 27-24 loss in the regular season to the Kansas City Chiefs. Maybe only, the Patriots in their prime or the Saints this year, right? Would be, upset with that result. At the end of the day, they lost to Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in the league, Andy Reid, maybe the best coach in the league right now, by 3 points. And they almost made a huge comeback. So at the end of the day, this team is good, but they're not going to win a Super Bowl. But what was your expectation? And again, I think at the end of the year, they'll sort of sit down, figure it out. And I think year 2 Tampa Bay will be a lot better than year 1. Not to mention in year 2, there's the possibility that Drew Brees isn't the Saints quarterback anymore, that he retires after this year. I think year 2 is the real year for Tampa Bay. And I know it's unfortunate because, Tampa Bay's hosting the Super Bowl this year, all this hype, year 1, but you have to understand. Tom Brady was with the same city, the same coach, the same organization, the same offense for 20 years. To go to a complete 180, new city, new coaching staff, new environment, just the lifestyle in Tampa Bay versus living in Boston is completely polar opposite. So at the end of the day, they'll figure it out. Tom Brady is a smart guy. He's the greatest quarterback of all time. And I do believe in Bruce Arians, but some people who are calling for Arians to sort of be removed or get replaced with Josh McDaniels or something is not seeing the point of this. I think they just haven't sort of meshed the offense together. And I think something that Bruce Arians and a lot of other NFL coaches need to do is instead of trying to come with new creative ways to get your guys involved and be different and be special and catch everybody off guard, identify the strengths of your football team and use them to your advantage. That's what the Patriots do. They're doing it this year. That's what the Dolphins do, Brian Flores. That's what a lot of these Belichick disciples do. That's what Andy Reid does. Andy Reid isn't, he gets fancy with the play calling, but every week's the same. Get the ball to Tyreek Hill, get the ball to Travis Kelce, right? And try to establish a run game so you're not throwing the ball 50 times and burning out Patrick Mahomes' arm, right? Just identify your strengths and play to your advantage, and your talent should win you a lot of games. And I think that would be the case for Tampa Bay. But again, I don't think there's not necessarily a problem. It's just all about expectations. All right, that's going to do it for this segment. On the other side of this segment, I want to continue talking about a lot of these NFL narratives. What do I think about the Browns, the Dolphins, the Seahawks, the Eagles, some of these other teams? We'll get into all that good stuff right after this short break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the episode, to the show, actually. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished talking about sort of my opinion on the situation in Tampa Bay. Again, I don't think there's a real issue, a fireable offense for Bruce Arians by any means. I think some people are sort of overreacting to the struggles. At the end of the day, this offense does put up points, and a lot of their games that they've lost have been pretty close besides that, blowout Saints game. And again, a 27-24 loss against the Kansas City Chiefs, who I'll talk about in a minute, is not, I don't know what result you expected in that game. The Chiefs were favored in that game, by about 3.5, I believe. So what we thought was going to happen kind of happened. The Chiefs won the game by 3, and it was a close game. Now, the flow of the game was weird, right? The Kansas City got a huge lead. Tampa Bay kind of came back, and then, Kansas City kind of put it away. But again, a 27-24 result is almost what you're expecting. And at the end of the day, me, just like a lot of other people, had this Tampa Bay team going 11-5, second in the division to New Orleans Saints, and being a wild card team, and probably the better one of the best wild card teams in the league, and still, a top 10 team in the league, top 10 offense in the league, right? And that's what's happening. And I think after the season, the Bucs are only going to get better. I don't think the Super Bowl window for Tampa Bay is only 1 year. I think Tom Brady keeps himself in immaculate shape. His arm looks better than it did last year. He looks better than he did, at least statistically, his stats are going to absolutely blow out of the water. At least from a yards and a touchdown perspective from last year to this year. And I think after this year, him, Leftwich, and Arians, assuming he's still there, like I think he will be, will sit down and sort of not reinvent this offense, but find different, more creative ways to incorporate it. You got to remember, because of COVID, there was no true traditional offseason. I don't know how many opportunities that, Brady had to sit down with Leftwich and Arians to really develop this offensive system. I'm sure they did a little bit, but maybe not as much as they would like. So I think at the end of this offseason, you'll see sort of a retooled offense of Tampa Bay. And not that this season's going to be a failure. I think they'll, go to the wild card game and they'll, win their first game against the wild card opponent, and then, they'll move on to the next one, because I'm assuming if they're the number 1 wild card team in the NFC, they'll face whoever wins the NFC East. So right now I believe that's the Giants. So I would take, obviously Tampa Bay to run up the Giants, and then who knows how would they do against the Saints or something like that. So I really do think that Tampa Bay is going to be just okay for the long term, and this year might not be a Super Bowl, but look towards next year as a sort of revamped offense. Now, I want to talk about the flip side of that game now, which is the Kansas City Chiefs. And I have come, not necessarily to a realization, I think I've always thought about like this, but the NFL this year has been awesome. There's a ton of good teams in this league. In years past, sort of the divisions and conferences have been really top-heavy, and there's been a couple of good teams at the top, and then sort of pretenders at the bottom, and then some 8-8 teams, 9-7 teams, right? This year, I think we have a lot of good football teams, and I want to talk about later on in the show my top 10 NFL teams. I like to do it at least once a week going into this, this season after all the games have been played. And it changes it constantly changes, because again, this league is always so crazy, but this particular year's been weird. There's times where I'm like, wow, I really love what Arizona's doing, and then they lose to Miami, but beat Buffalo, and they get, lose to the Rams, and it's like, okay, that's kind of weird. And you're like, oh wow, well the Rams look really good now too, and then, they lose to Miami, and then they also lose to San Francisco last night 2 nights ago against Nick Mullins, and you're sort of confused, and you love Seattle, but they have turnover problems, their defense doesn't show up, but then they ball out against Philadelphia. So it's an ever-changing league, but I have come to the conclusion that there's only one elite team this year, and that's Kansas City. And I love what Pittsburgh's doing. I understand they're 10-0, and they're incredible, but they've played the second easiest schedule in the league, only second to Cleveland, who I'll talk about later on in the show too. And eventually they're going to lose a game. I don't think they're going undefeated or anything like that. And I wouldn't take them to beat Kansas City. And I really like what New Orleans doing, with Drew Brees and everything like that. But can you trust Drew Brees in the playoffs? They've been knocked out, 5 of the last 6 years. They haven't won since that Super Bowl. The Minneapolis Miracle, the loss last year to Minnesota, and Kirk Cousins, the no call against the Rams. They haven't been able to get over the hump. And yes, their team has improved a little bit, but they're sort of keep running it back. And I don't know if I have faith that they'll get to the big game, which is the Super Bowl. Tampa Bay, I just talked about their struggles a little bit. So I think there's really only one elite team in this league, and I think it's Kansas City. And, that's weird to say. That I'm not saying that there should be, 3 or 4 elite teams, but, in the prime of the New England years, you thought, oh, they were elite. And, you think a couple of other teams were in there as well. I don't see a team this year outside of Kansas City where I completely 100% I'm like, this team is going to the Super Bowl. I don't see a way where Kansas City does not win the AFC. And again, I love everything Pittsburgh's doing. They're incredible, but, them too. They have recent playoff struggles. They lost to, Jacksonville a couple of years ago. I think the last time they were in the playoffs. Big Ben, as the season goes on, arm. His arm is only going to get worse and worse. And then, sure, they'll have home field advantage throughout potentially. But is there any other team in maybe sports history, not sports history, in football history, I should really say, because I think you can make the case for some basketball teams like this. But have you ever seen a team that could go down 20-0 and I wouldn't blink an eye? If Kansas City was down 20-0 at half, I would still have them favored to win the game. I would still bet on them to win that game because they score so effortlessly and so quickly, and they never seem to be daunted or nervous or confused by anything, specifically at the end of games. I've never seen game-winning drives or game-ending drives like we saw against Tampa Bay where, they were up 3 and they had the ball and they just had to get a couple first downs. They're just so calm. I mean, when you look at it, Tampa Bay had one timeout and there was, second down or something like that, and the Chiefs threw on both of those plays. You have to, that level of trust between Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, it's a special type of thing to not just run out the clock and give the ball to Tampa Bay with about 40 seconds left and no timeouts and trust your defense. Instead, you're going to throw the ball, risking to give them maybe, a minute and a half and a timeout or something like that, and you can just close it out that way is ridiculous. And again, I want to give you a stat here with Patrick Mahomes because I don't think we're appreciating how great he is. I mean, I'm not as old as maybe some of you other guys are, but you guys have, maybe got to watch Michael Jordan or Magic Johnson or Joe Montana, and I got to watch Brady, right? And here's an interesting stat. Ready for this? Most games with 400-plus passing yards, 3+ passing touchdowns, and no interceptions, which I would consider a ludicrous game and a perfect game, right? If you want to say 400-plus yards, 400 passing yards, 3 touchdowns or more, and no interceptions since 1950 in their career. Number 1 is Drew Brees with 9. Number 2 is Tom Brady with 5. Peyton Manning is number 3 with 5. Aaron Rodgers is on this list. Ben Roethlisberger is on this list. First ballot Hall of Famers. The greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady. So Drew Brees in 284 career games has 9 of those games. 9 special games. I would call those games special. Some all-time great games. 400-plus passing yards, 3+ touchdowns, no interceptions. That is a special game. Unstoppable force. Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time, has played 297 career games. He's done that 5 times. Peyton Manning played 266 career games. He did that 5 times. Ben Roethlisberger played 228 career games. He's done it 4 times. Aaron Rodgers, another all-time great talent, 192 games played, and he did that 4 times. Again, those special games. Patrick Mahomes has played in 42 NFL games. He already has 4 of those games. Every 10 games, Patrick Mahomes gives you a 400-plus yard performance with 3+ touchdowns and no interceptions. He's already at the level of Aaron Rodgers in that regard to that stat, and Ben Roethlisberger, and one behind the great Peyton Manning, and one behind the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady, and you already know he's going to lap Drew Brees by the end of his career. I don't think we understand the greatness we're watching. Patrick Mahomes has legitimately the potential to be the greatest quarterback of all time. I understand that Tom Brady is still playing and is still actively the GOAT, and I will never deny that Tom Brady is not the greatest quarterback of all time. But do you see a team that legitimately has the formula to stop Kansas City in the Super Bowl? Do you trust the Saints to beat them in the Super Bowl? Do you trust, some of these other teams? You trust Green Bay, who can get out physicaled? They can beat you so many ways, and all they do is identify exactly what they need to do. They do the same thing every time. They want to run the ball, to, establish a run game, a power offense, open up the play action game, and then look for Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. It is not a difficult formula that Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes run, but they perfected it. And this is what I was talking about in the last segment, because I'm going to talk about some coaches as well when I give you my top 10 teams, about some coaches who could potentially be on the hot seat. And the main thing that I thought of is why don't coaches in the NFL, again, they try to get cute with it and they try to find new and creative ways to get it to maybe the secondary guy and trick the defense. Andy Reid has done it so beautifully where he's like, wait. We have the best quarterback in the league. We have the fastest receiver in the league. We have the best tight end in the league. The game plan each and every week is not adapt to the other team. It's they need to stop us. NFL teams need to have the mentality of, instead of trying to trick the opponent because the opponent, these teams just assume that their defense is going to be able to take their best players away. Kansas City doesn't do that. They identify, we're going to get the ball to Tyreek Hill, and we're going to get the ball to Travis Kelce, and they're going to win every single game. They're 9-1 this year. They have the one hiccup against Oakland, which I don't care about. Even Golden State had a ton of those games where they somehow dropped the game to Cleveland or something like that, where everyone was like, oh, maybe Golden State will win this year, and then they can just turn the flip. They remind me of the Golden State Warriors and the fact that they could be down 20, and then you take a blink of an eye, and about a quarter later, you're down 15. And that's how it works in the NFL, and that's where it worked in the NBA with Golden State. And I don't mean to say that there's no level of competition, because the NFL's been great this year. The AFC playoff race is absolutely incredible. It's going to come down to the wire. Teams like the Dolphins, teams like the Raiders, even the Patriots are still involved a little bit there. Buffalo is trying to hold on to their division. The AFC playoff race is going to be great. But once the playoffs start, there's a team that's going to win the Super Bowl, and it's going to be Kansas City. And they're going to be the first team to repeat since the Patriots. And again, this team has a better chance than any other team in sports to be a dynasty. More than the Lakers in the NBA, more than, some of these other NFL teams, or maybe even, you look at a team like Milwaukee or the Lakers or Golden State again or Miami if they get Giannis, things like that, right? The Kansas City Chiefs are the best sports team in America right now, and they're absolutely unstoppable in what I believe to be maybe the hardest league in the world, the NFL. So that's my stance on Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes and all that. We're going to take another short break. On the flip side of this short break, I want to be giving you, continue to talk about some of these storylines, and also I'll be giving you my top 10 NFL teams, all of that good stuff in an absolutely packed segment right after this.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Again, if you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished talking about the flip side of, obviously, the game of the week between Kansas City and Tampa Bay. In the first segment, I talked about Tampa Bay, and then I talked about how Kansas City really reminds me of Golden State. I don't know if there's a team in the NFL that I don't think I could even favor the Steelers over them. I don't think I could. I think Kansas City just has so many ways to get their playmakers open, and I don't think there's a team, maybe the Saints do this, maybe Pittsburgh do this, that gets the hand on their playmakers more. I really don't think so. Now, I want to talk about a couple of other storylines quickly before I give you my top 10 NFL teams through this point in the season. The first thing I want to talk about is Philadelphia. So obviously Philadelphia is not on my top 10 list, so I won't talk about them there. But they just lost the Monday night game to Seattle, and it was a good game, not a great game. It was sort of a sloppy start, but everyone's talking about Carson Wentz. And now I was a big defender of Carson Wentz at the beginning of this year. I did a couple of segments on why I believe that Carson Wentz was the best quarterback in that division. I did the classic Dak versus Wentz debate multiple times on this show. And all Carson Wentz has done me wrong this season is completely proved me wrong. The only thing I can really compare it to is Markelle Fultz. That's how I view it. I think he's gone such a fall from grace since that sort of MVP type form that he had that year to now. And I'm starting to think that there's a couple of things that made Carson Wentz so great that year, and that maybe that this is more the Carson Wentz than maybe that MVP form. One, he was healthy. I think that was the healthiest he has been his entire career was that year. Number two, he had an incredible offensive coordinator and Frank Wright, and he had incredible weapons that year too. I think Darren Sproles was still on that team. I know some of the other guys at the running back. J.J. was on that team as well. Alshon Jeffrey was still in his prime. Zach Ertz was healthy and in his prime as well. Guys like Jason Peters were still young and developing, or not young, but younger than they are now, and that defense was absolutely stacked. Now, you get sort of moments of that defense and not so much. Alshon Jeffrey's pretty much unplayable. There's absolutely no weapons on that team, and Ertz is in and out of injury concerns. And that run game, I don't know. I like Miles Sanders, but it's not. I think it was supposed to be better this year, and it's just not there. And obviously, Carson Wentz leads the league in turnovers. So what do the Eagles need to do? I hate to say this because, again, I am a big Carson Wentz fan. I have compared him multiple times to Brett Favre, and I still think he is a very similar type player, and we're seeing it now. But honestly, the Minnesota years with Brett Favre are better than what Carson Wentz is looking like now. And the fact that Carson Wentz has regressed when he's only 27 years old is quite concerning. Is it the injuries catching up to him? He had back problems. He's had that knee injury, of course, and he's had a couple of other banged up injuries as well. But it's so crazy because even last year, I thought Carson Wentz still looked good. And he obviously took them to the playoffs, and if it wasn't for a concussion, potentially won them that playoff game against Seattle. So I don't know what has happened this year to next year. Is it just, the team and things like that? But I think maybe looking back on that Super Bowl team, we have to admit that football team was absolutely stacked. And on top of that, they had a really, really good offensive coordinator in Frank Reich. Now, I still love Howie Roseman, the general manager of the Philadelphia Eagles, and I don't disagree with the contract that they signed Carson Wentz to, because again, at the time, Carson Wentz like a potential MVP candidate if he stayed healthy and was winning multiple divisions for that team. And at the end of the day, you can't fault the GM for that, and I don't fault Doug Peterson either, for doing what he did. In regards to, sticking with Carson Wentz and things like that. Because, again, you saw what Carson Wentz was at his best, which was almost like peak Brett Favre. Tons of touchdowns, tons of yards, big plays, MVP-type year. I mean, he wasn't playing in the Super Bowl because of the injury, but he got that team to the heights, right? So I understand that. And then, of course, this week there was the report that, Jalen Hurts was going to get more, plays and, reps than anybody else or than he's ever had, I think that was honestly more of a report that came out. I mean, NFL teams don't leak things very often. I think NFL franchises, maybe more than some other franchises, are really good, specifically, in comparison to the NBA, at keeping things under wraps and not letting things leak and things like that. I wouldn't be surprised if the Eagles purposely leaked that Jalen Hurts was getting more first-team reps so that, Seattle would, spend more time trying to prepare for it. He didn't get that many plays. I think he only threw one pass and he completed it. But if I'm Philadelphia, I think it's time to bench Carson Wentz and start Jalen Hurts. I think it's a lost season. I think you need to accept that you're probably not winning the division. That's either going to be the Giants or the Washington football team. And I think you need to see what you have in Jalen Hurts, because if you don't have what you have in Jalen Hurts, you might have to go look at the draft next year. Now, I liked Jalen Hurts as a prospect. I didn't love him. I thought he was a second-round pick. I expected him to get drafted by a team like Pittsburgh. I was shocked when Philadelphia picked him. Now, here's the thing. I think you could get something for Carson Wentz if you traded him. I don't think it's worth throwing Carson Wentz out there the rest of the year. He looks lost. He's turning the ball over. And if you want any chance of potentially, giving a spark in this division, maybe doing what Ryan Tannehill did for Tennessee last year, I'd hand the keys over to Jalen Hurts. But here's the thing with Doug Peterson. So if you didn't understand clearly, now I agree now that it's time to move off of Carson Wentz. I think you could trade him. I think there'd be some teams interested, teams that see, the hype and you want to put some butts in seats and try to do a sort of a reclamation project. I see it. You could probably get him for, second, third round pick, move off of him, see what you have in Jalen Hurts, mobile guy. I think the offense that they run is a little bit more built for Jalen Hurts. They'd like to do some rollouts and things like that, which would be interesting to see with Jalen Hurts, of course. But if Doug Peterson is going to do for the rest of the year what it appears he's already been doing, which is refusing to make any change, refusing to do anything, I wouldn't be surprised if Doug Peterson was fired. Now, Doug Peterson is not a bad coach. I think he did find a job relatively easily and relatively quickly. But again, going back to that Super Bowl team, I think we need to give Frank Reich, who's obviously done an outstanding job in Indianapolis without a franchise quarterback, right? He had Andrew Luck. They were incredible. He retires. They go to Jacoby Brissett. They somehow stay afloat. They're with Phillip Rivers now in contention for that division. Again, imagine if they got a guy like Sam Darnold or something like that. That team would be absolutely incredible. So I think it's sort of things like that. Now, is it all Carson Wentz's fault? No, there's not a lot of playmakers on that team. That defense is regressing. And again, I think there's been some questionable calls with the Eagles and with Doug Peterson. Again, that 4th and 4, you don't kick a field goal there to make it an 8-point game. That makes absolutely no sense to me. You go for it, and Carson, he threw a terrible ball that went straight to the safety in the end zone. Again, that offensive line's banged up. It's not great. There's other excuses, but at the end of the day, it's the NFL, and the quarterback position is the most important position, and then the leader. And when things don't go right, it's either the coach or the QB that's going to get blamed. I would blame more of the QB in this circumstance just because I've seen what Doug Peterson has done. But if Doug Peterson is going to refuse to move off of Carson Wentz, again, I like Howie Roseman, the GM. I think they have good management in Philadelphia. It might be time to move on, and it might be time to look for someone else. Not necessarily that Doug did a bad job and you had to fire him, but just the stars aren't aligning. The partnership isn't what it used to be. The relationship isn't what it used to be, and it might be time to move off of. And like I've been saying all show, coaches need to do a better job of adapting and changing. That's how Bill Belichick, dominated for years. Mike Tomlin's still dominating. Pete Carroll, Seahawks haven't had a losing season since Russell came into the league. And while I give a lot of credit to Russell, Pete Carroll has something to do with that. Things like that. So at the end of the day, I think it's time to move off of Carson Wentz And that's my stance on that. Now, I want to talk about the New York Jets a little bit. I think it's not, I don't mean to laugh, but there's the clip of the New York media. I'll keep this quick, sort of catching Adam Gase red-handed on he's not telling the truth on who's calling the plays. And I think it's official, and I think it'll be quick. Is Adam Gase I'll say is Adam Gase. Is Adam Gase the worst head coach in football history? I would put him up there with Jeff Fisher. I put him up with some of these other guys. But Adam Gase, I don't know if he's ever lost a locker room quickly and been so anti-team. And I honestly think that if you think the Dolphins were tanking last year, if you think any of these other teams were potentially tanking last year, the Jets are truly tanking, and I think hanging on to Adam Gase is just a tanking thing. But again, I like their GM, Joe Douglas. I think he comes from the Philadelphia tree, actually. Once they get a coach, I'd love to see them go after Jim Harbaugh, potentially if he leaves Michigan. And once they get Trevor Lawrence, I think they could revamp things here. But I do want to talk about Sam Darnold a minute here, because while the Jets' offense is bad and their play calling is bad, he stunk against the Dolphins. No touchdowns, 2 picks in his return. He's playing with an AC joint injury. Again, I think he's still a franchise quarterback. I don't think he's the Jets' franchise quarterback, but I still think that Pittsburgh would be a great fit for him. Again, I've talked about it in lengths that Indianapolis and him would be a perfect marriage. But what I don't understand is, despite them being so bad, he had all of his receivers healthy, right? Again, it's not a good receiving core, but Denzel Mims, Rashad Perryman, Jamison Crowder, that's respectable, right? There's worse cores out there. There's worse, that's better than what New England has right now. And again, Sam Darnold was absolutely atrocious. 16 to 27, 197 yards, no touchdowns, 2 picks, 3 sacks. I mean, it's not, their number one offensive weapon is Frank Gore. The Jets are just so bad, and I don't think they're going to win a single game this year, and I don't even know if Trevor Lawrence can save them. All right, so for the next couple minutes or so, I want to do what I usually do once a week, my top 10 NFL teams. I try not to do it based off record. I try to do it sort of just as a who do I think would beat who sort of thing, and where do I actually think the top 10 teams are, regardless of record, regardless of conference, things like that. So let's get right into it, and hopefully in this top 10, I'll be talking about 10 of the most important teams in the league, and I'll be able to give you my opinions on some of them and where I think they stand going forward the rest of the year, as we have about 5-6 games left, depending on what team you're talking about. So let's start off with number 10. At number 10, I have the Cleveland Browns, and the Cleveland Browns are 8-3, and there's some teams above them that only have 7 wins, so you might be like, why isn't Cleveland higher? The Cleveland Browns are the worst 8-3 team in the league, and I think they're the worst 8-win team through 10 or 11 weeks in the NFL history. I'm not saying they're bad. I think they're a good team, but I think what Kevin Stefanski has realized is that Baker Mayfield isn't a difference maker, and Baker Mayfield is a guy who can distribute the ball relatively well, but if there's no great rushing attack and there's no good defense and there's no good weapons, Baker Mayfield doesn't elevate a franchise. So something I talk about a lot on this show is there's a difference between a guy, just an average quarterback, and there's the guy that can lift your team. Patrick Mahomes elevates his teammates, right? Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce were totally, on the team when Alex Smith was there. Why are they so good now? Patrick Mahomes elevates them. Tom Brady elevates his guys. Aaron Rodgers, maybe more than any other quarterback in the league, has done more with less elevating his guys. Baker Mayfield right now has the best rushing attack in the league, best defensive line in the league, and one of the better defenses in the league, and they have an outstanding wide receiving core, and they have 2 incredible tight ends. I mean, in theory, this team should have more wins, but I'm not too impressed with them beating Jacksonville by 2? Jacksonville with Mike Glennon and James Robinson and DJ Chark and Doug Marrone as their head coach. I'm sorry. I'm just not that impressed by that. Cleveland is a playoff team in my opinion. I think they'll finish ahead of Baltimore. They've also had the easiest schedule in the league, but I don't understand why some people are re-falling in love with Baker Mayfield. He hasn't done anything. He throws the ball, 20 times max? He's a fine distributor of the football, and I think Kevin Stefanski, they're a top 10 team because of Kevin Stefanski, is what I'm saying. Kevin Stefanski knows how to run the ball, and they know that they have 2 top. You could argue Kareem Hunt's a top 10 back in the league, and Nick Chubb I think is top 5 at worst. So you could argue that Cleveland has 2 top 10 backs in the league, and they know that they need to run the ball. So they're a top 10 team because of Kevin Stefanski and their defensive line, specifically Myles Garrett. That's why I have them there. I don't know if they're going to win a playoff game when they get there. All right, now let's get to number 9, and I know a lot of people are going to say I have this way too low for them. I have Buffalo. I think they have a ceiling, and I think Josh Allen is too turnover prone in late in games, and I don't trust him to make the big play when it matters most. I think they have a great defense. I love their head coach, but like I've said always with Josh Allen, the Bills would be a lot better if they had Justin Herbert there, if they had Tua Tagovailoa there, if they had guys who are not going to turn the ball over and cost their team. Have you noticed that the Bills always play in close games? That's because Josh Allen's stat line always includes an interception or 2 and a terrible completion percentage. Has he improved? Certainly. I think I didn't expect him to be this good this year. He's definitely improved on his accuracy. I don't want to be completely negative on Josh Allen, but the worst player on the Bills right now that plays a significant role is Josh Allen. It's not Diggs. It's not their rushing attack. It's not their O-line. It's not their defense. The only the only reason why the Buffalo Bills lose games this year is because of Josh Allen. So I think he's holding them back, and I don't trust him in the playoffs. That's why they're coming in at number 9. Coming in at number 8, some people might say I'm a little too high on them, is Miami. They have won with 2 different quarterbacks in this league that have had 2 completely different play styles. They've won with Tua Tagovailoa. They're 3-1 with him, and they've won with Ryan Fitzpatrick as well. So they go out there and they stomp the Jets, but I hope after the Jets game, yes, the Jets game was a blowout, but that game was a lot closer than people give it credit for. The Dolphins need Tua Tagovailoa. He's built for this team. They don't need turnovers. They lead the league in takeaways this year. Xavier Howard has the most interceptions in the league this year. I think he should be considered for Defensive Player of the Year. Not try to take away anything that Aaron Donald or specifically Myles Garrett have done this year. But Xavier Howard to have 7 interceptions through 10 or 11 games is ridiculous. Nobody has more interceptions since they entered the league than him. I officially believe he's the most underrated defensive player in the league. Xavier Howard leading the league in interceptions. 17 straight games with the takeaway for this Miami Dolphin team. Brian Flores, in my opinion, should either win Coach of the Year or finish second to Mike Tomlin. Take your pick. He's been absolutely outstanding. And you have to remember, the Dolphins have won games without some positional coaches due to COVID. They had a new offensive and defensive coordinator this year, and all they've done is gotten better. Brian Flores is the reason why the Dolphins are so good. And I love Tua Tagovailoa, but the reason why the Dolphins are so good and why they're 7-4 right now is not because of Tua. It's because of Brian Flores. And he is honestly a superstar in the making. And I think today, if Tua Tagovailoa is playing and not Ryan Fitzpatrick, again, the Miami Dolphins had a fourth quarter lead over Buffalo the game they played, and Fitzpatrick decided to throw, I think, at least a 1 pick and maybe even 2 in the fourth quarter of that game, and that's why they lost. If you have Tua Tagovailoa in there, who, again, still has not thrown an interception as an NFL quarterback, I understand he missed last game, but in his first 4 starts, he's 3-1, no interceptions. His only loss was to a really good defense in Denver and that high altitude and with Vic Fangio. Again, not a loss that Tom Brady has suffered from over the years, that a lot of great quarterbacks have suffered from, going up in that altitude against that defense and things like that. So I think today I'd pick Miami over Buffalo. I don't know if, Miami's going to be able to catch Buffalo in the division. They're 1 game back. But I really do believe that if given the opportunity to win the division, if it's even that last week of the year, I would take Miami with Tua Tagovailoa and Brian Flores over the Buffalo Bills. I trust them more, I trust their coach more, and I love Sean McDermott. But again, 17 straight takeaways for this Miami Dolphin team, 7 interceptions for Xavier Howard. Seems like he gets one every game. It's absolutely ridiculous, not to mention their improved defense overall. The only thing that I'm a little bit concerned about is their offensive playmakers. I really like Devontae Parker. He's sort of not necessarily a one-trick pony, but when Tua comes in, there's not a trust level yet. Ryan Fitzpatrick obviously loves to throw the deep ball and the jump ball. Tua's still acclimating to that. Once Tua gets, just as that, the same level of trust that Fitzpatrick has with Gesicki and Parker, the Dolphins will take off. So I have them as a top 10 team coming in at number 8, Miami Dolphins, because of Brian Flores, not because of Tua, Brian Flores. Number 7, I'm going to stick in Florida, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, this is a top 10 team in the league. They lost a close game to Kansas City. I would put them ahead in the top 5 or top 6. They're just too inconsistent for me, man. You literally saw how inconsistent they were last game. They got blown out in the first half, come back in the second half, and they look absolutely incredible. So it depends on who you're getting week to week, or maybe even half to half, or quarter to quarter, or honestly with this Tampa Bay team, series to series. I think their defense is good. I think they got a little bit exposed against Kansas City, but that happens to a lot of good defenses and a lot of good teams in this league. Again, they're still a top 10 team, and I expect them to win at least a playoff game. But I do think that Tennessee would push them around a little bit. They come in at number 6. Tennessee's a really physical football team. Again, Derrick Henry is absolutely incredible. I don't know if there's a team that could embarrass you more physically and sort of out-muscle you and outwork you more than this team does in Tennessee. Derrick Henry's absolutely incredible last game. Again, the only reason why they're not top 5, I still don't trust Ryan Tannehill in the big games in comparison to some of these other teams with really, really elite quarterbacks. But at the end of this day, this defense is improving, and Mike Vrabel's a really, really good head coach. And I do not want to play this team in the playoffs. This team is physical. They will out-muscle you, and they will run it down your throat with arguably the best back in the league in Derrick Henry. So coming in at number 6, I have the Tennessee Titans. Coming in at number 5, I actually have the Seattle Seahawks. Now, I go back and forth with Seattle and the team above them. I really liked what I saw from Seattle's defense against Philadelphia, specifically their pass rush. That's their biggest issue. They have the quarterback, Russell Wilson. They have the weapons with Disley, Lockett, and DK Metcalf, who was absolutely incredible last night. And they have Chris Carson back, who's healthy now. And I think Carlos Hyde's a good secondary back as an option, of course, if Carson keeps staying injured. Again, I'm just looking for the defense. They get Jamal Adams back. They got Carlos Dunlap from Cincinnati, and he had a really nice game last night. So did Jamal Adams as well, who's still not 100% healthy, but he looked great. If their defense can keep showing me this against maybe a better team, show me this against San Francisco or the Rams in particular. Show me this against the Rams. Show me this against some of these other teams, and I'll put you at number 4 instead of number 5. And with that being said, at number 4 we have Green Bay. I think Green Bay's only weakness is that I think they're a little bit too flashy. I think unlike Kansas City, they could get pushed around. If Green Bay played Tennessee in a Super Bowl, I wouldn't be surprised if Tennessee won that game. Green Bay has a terrible run defense. I think they could be exposed easily. But again, Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, I think they might have the best. It's tough. The best quarterback wide receiver chemistry was always Brady Gronk or Brady Edelman. But now that they've kind of split up apart a little bit, it's either Mahomes and Hill, but I really think that Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers might have the best chemistry in the league. I put them at number 4 because their offense is so good and they can beat you multiple ways, run game, pass game, and Aaron is playing one of the best years of his entire career. But that defense is not good outside of Jair Alexander and the Smiths. Other than them, that defense is weak and can be exposed easily, specifically in the run game, which is why they're not a top 3 team. Now, coming in at number 3, I have New Orleans. They were really close to number 2. I need to see what this team looks like if they in the playoffs, because again, I love Drew Brees. I love Sean Payton. And they're winning without Drew Brees right now with Taysom Hill. But I've seen too many times them get to the playoffs and lose to teams like the Vikings and lose to the teams that are lower than them. They're a team that tends to usually play down to their competition. They haven't done that this year. I wouldn't surprise me if the Saints got to a Super Bowl and represented the NFC. They're my number 1 team in the NFC right now. But again, I just need to see a little bit more against some better teams. And I think they need to somehow try to establish a vertical passing game. I know that they don't need to and that they're winning games in the short and intermediate passing game. But in the playoffs, eventually they're going to have to learn to take some deep shots. And I don't know if Drew can do that anymore. So that's why they're coming in at number 3. Again, still an incredible team. And their defense is the best that it's looked in years. So I'm hoping that plus Drew Brees maybe developing a little bit of a vertical passing game, unlike in years past, can maybe get the Saints over the top and they can be representing the NFC in the Super Bowl. Coming in at number 2 is the undefeated team, 10-0 Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, I don't think they're going to be undefeated. I really like everything about them. They have a perfect defense, all the weapons in the world, and Big Ben's having a real resurgence year. My guess is that he wins Comeback Player of the Year. Mike Tomlin potentially wins Coach of the Year. I just need to see it in the playoffs because I have fallen for Pittsburgh before with this incredible record, and they go into the playoffs and they lose to freaking Jacksonville or something like that. So I have seen this too many times to put them at number 1. That's why they're coming in at number 2. But they're quite literally top to bottom from a roster standpoint, a perfect football team. Coming in at number 1, though, of course, is Kansas City. Again, there's a gap between Kansas City and everybody else. I think they're going to roll through the playoffs. It wouldn't surprise me if they just kind of rolled into the Super Bowl as well. I'm expecting them to repeat at this point, and that's no shade to these other teams. I think there's a lot of good teams in this league this year. I think the Raiders are a great team who I left off this list. There are a couple other teams, too, that aren't on this list as well. But again, at the end of the day, I think Kansas City is just so much better than everybody else, and they can just do anything they want, kind of, really, from an offensive standpoint. And they just always seem to find ways to get Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce involved. Not to mention Patrick Mahomes isn't even, they're not even a throwing dominant team. They run the ball a ton too with Le'Veon Bell and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So coming in number 1 is the Kansas City Chiefs. And those are my top 10 NFL teams heading into this week. Let me know what you think. Would you move some teams around? Would you add a team maybe that I didn't have on this list? Let me know what your top 10 NFL teams are. Teams like the Ravens and Raiders are obviously not there right now. All right, we're going to take one final short break. On the other side of this, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Will he sign the Supermax? Will he not? I want to go through all of his options. And should Giannis stay in Milwaukee, I'll give you my opinion on if I believe he should sign the Supermax or test free agency next year. We'll get into all that good stuff right after this final short break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Massford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to continue to listen to the GSMC Sports Podcast. If you're a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. The final thing I want to talk about today is Giannis Antetokounmpo. So there was a Twitter rumor circulating around that Giannis plans on signing the extension. There isn't any confirmed rumor from Woj, ESPN, that he's planning on doing that or anything. And then he had an interview that some people said made it seem like he was leaving. So it's very unclear what Giannis is supposed to do. But people seem to be under the assumption that Giannis should return because the Milwaukee Bucs have done everything in their power to get him a good team. I would argue they have not. And in fact, I think they have put themselves in a worse position over the next 5 years than they were before all of these trades. They gave up their entire future for Jrue Holiday, who I think is a good player. You could even argue a great player. Is he a needle mover? Is he a guy that's going to make your team go from down? Again, we got to remember they didn't like lose to the Miami Heat in 7 games in the second round. They practically got swept. So is a Jrue Holiday a guy that's going to make a difference in the series by 3 games? I don't think so. Is Jrue Holiday a guy that's going to propel the Milwaukee Bucks to be better than the Nets or the Heat or even the Celtics? I don't think so. Or is it going to propel you even if you do get through all this to be Anthony Davis and the Lakers? I don't think so. And again, going forward, they absolutely have 0 trade pieces. They have no picks over the next 5 years. Their best trade asset would be to get rid of Middleton, which I don't think they want to do, right? And the guy that Giannis wanted more than anybody else, Bogdan Bogdanovic, the Milwaukee Bucks completely bottled after having a trade in place and it falling through. So if I'm Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Bucks have given me no reason and no indication to extend there, especially when there's other organizations that will be going after him, such as Golden State, Miami, the Lakers, who have all shown the incredible ability to get talented and good players while maintaining cap flexibility. The Miami Heat got Jimmy Butler with no cap space a year ago, and they have a ton of cap space and a ton of potential moves to be made now with a ton of trade assets. Obviously, we know what Golden State can do with adding talent, with adding Kevin Durant and being excellent through the draft with Klay Thompson, things like that. They just drafted James Wiseman, who could be a potential home run pick. Even Toronto has shown that their player development is maybe even second to nobody. So I don't understand why some people believe that this Jrue Holiday trade is like, adding Dwayne Wade to the Heat or getting a third star. Jrue Holiday is not a star. He's a potential all-star player, but I don't even know if I'd put him there in the East. And you gave up Bledsoe and all of your picks. So I don't know how much better the Milwaukee Bucks got immediately. Maybe a little bit better. But in my opinion, the difference between the Bucks last year and this year is maybe instead of losing to the Heat in 5, maybe you lose to the Heat in 6. And that's just how I view it with Milwaukee and everything like that. Let me know what you think. Do you think the Milwaukee Bucks have done a good enough job and enough of a job to convince Giannis Antetokounmpo to stay? Now, with all that being said, maybe Giannis is just a loyal guy and isn't going to leave no matter what, and what other move they made. But again, mortgaging your future for the next 5 years to add Jrue Holiday and then bottling the Bogdan Bogdanovic trade, which is who Giannis really wanted this offseason, was him, is interesting. And also after that interview of him saying, I don't care if I'm the 1, 2, or 3, I just want to win. We'll see what happens after they don't win this year. So I don't think the Bucks are going to win a championship this year, and I think 2021 free agency, Giannis is going to test it. I do not expect him to sign that extension, but again, I could be wrong, and he could sign it. Another rumor that's been going around right now is what is happening with Victor Oladipo. He had an interview, and he said he's committed to Indiana, but he didn't sound so confident in that. I would still keep an eye on the Miami Heat. They have still yet to make a major move, and they seem to have a little bit of a roster clog right now. They added Avery Bradley when they have a ton of guards on that team already with Nunn, Hero, Robinson, Butler, if you consider him a guard, and obviously Goran Dragic. Wouldn't surprise me if Nunn and Olynyk and a first still gets flipped for Victor Oladipo in South Beach. Don't be surprised if that happens. That's just a rumor to keep an eye on. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast, again brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Before I let you go, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general, and follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Again, I have been your host, Alex Massford. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and I will see you all in the next one.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.